The day my sister returned home, everything in the house shifted, like someone had quietly rearranged the furniture in the middle of the night. My mom's eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in years, her voice dripping with concern and warmth, as if my sister's arrival had reignited some forgotten tenderness. I stood there, half invisible, watching them slip back into an old rhythm that didn't include me. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small moments where my presence felt less important, conversations I wasn't part of, spaces I suddenly didn't belong in. But it didn't take long for that quiet unease to grow into something I couldn't ignore. The walls that had once felt like home began to press in, and I could feel myself becoming the outsider in my own family. When my sister walked through the door, it was like the whole atmosphere of the house shifted in an instant. I had expected it to be a happy reunion, of course. She hadn't been home in a while, and my mom had been counting down the days as if her return would fix something broken in all of us. But what I didn't anticipate was how suddenly and completely the balance of our home would tip. The moment my mom laid eyes on her, there was this light in her face that I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just joy, it was relief, like finally everything was going to be all right because my sister was here. She hugged her tight, fussed over her, asked her if she was hungry or tired or cold, like she was a child again instead of a grown woman. Standing there, I couldn't help but feel like I had accidentally wandered into someone else's family gathering. The energy was undeniable. My mom's tone softened, every word she spoke coated with affection, the kind she never seemed to have left over for me. Even the little things shifted. Her hands were quick to carry my sister's bags, quick to fix her favorite tea, quick to draw her into the kitchen to talk in low voices that didn't invite me in. I was used to being independent, to handling things on my own, and I'd long since stopped waiting for that kind of attention from my mom. Still, watching it spill so effortlessly onto my sister made the absence sting in a way I hadn't been prepared for. It wasn't just the warmth my mom offered, but the way the house itself seemed to bend around my sister, the living room, which usually carried a quiet stillness, filled with her laughter. The air seemed lighter when she was in it, and even my mom's movements had a new rhythm, busier, happier, more purposeful. I noticed how she cooked dishes we hadn't had in months, the ones my sister loved most. She went out of her way to decorate the dining table, lighting candles as if this were a holiday. It was like I was watching them create a world together that didn't need me. I tried to remind myself not to overthink it. Family welcomes can be overwhelming, and I wanted to believe the focus would balance out once the excitement settled. But deep down, I could already sense a shift happening, the kind you don't fully recognize until it's too late. My mom's eyes were always on her, checking if she was comfortable, listening to every sigh, every pause in her sentences, as if each one carried the weight of a secret she needed to solve. I caught myself staring, wondering when the last time was that she had looked at me with such unguarded care. The conversations quickly started to exclude me, though it wasn't always intentional. My mom and sister had an old language between them, built from shared moments and subtle gestures, a rhythm I was suddenly out of sync with. They reminisced about the past, laughed about old memories, whispered about plans I didn't know anything about. I stood nearby, smiling when it felt appropriate, but the smile didn't reach my chest. There's a quiet kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from realizing you're not part of something right in front of you. The strangest part was how quickly I began to feel like a guest in my own house. I noticed the small details, how my mom shifted her chair closer to my sister at dinner, how she asked me to give them some space when they were deep in conversation, how she lingered at my sister's bedroom door at night to check in. I couldn't remember the last time she had done that for me. It wasn't that I expected or demanded the same treatment, but the contrast was stark enough to leave me unsettled. The weight of it all sat heavy on my chest. I kept trying to rationalize it. She had been away, my mom missed her, and this was their way of reconnecting. But even those explanations couldn't drown out the sinking feeling that I had been replaced. My place in the family hadn't vanished overnight, but it felt thinner, like a photograph slowly fading in the sun. My mom's devotion to my sister wasn't cruel in itself, but it was absolute, and that absoluteness left little room for me. Every time I looked at my sister, I tried to remind myself that none of this was her fault. She hadn't asked to become the center of attention, and she probably didn't even realize the effect her presence was having on me yet. As the days went on, I couldn't shake the growing sense of distance forming between me and my mom. It was in the way she lowered her voice when she spoke to my sister, as though their conversations were sacred and mine were trivial. It was in the way she seemed lighter around her, as though my presence had always been a burden she hadn't admitted. That first week, I felt the ground quietly shifting beneath my feet. I hadn't been shoved aside, not yet, but the signs were there in every laugh I wasn't part of and every moment of tenderness I only witnessed from the outside. I could feel my place being rewritten without my consent, the hierarchy rearranged so smoothly it almost seemed natural. That was the hardest part, realizing that the shift wasn't loud or dramatic, but subtle, creeping in like a shadow until suddenly I wasn't standing in the center anymore. I was just orbiting around a world where my sister had become the sun. You said, expand key point no one. With 700 words and don't add headings and closing sentence. ChatGPT said, when my sister came home it felt like someone had flipped a switch in the house, casting everything in a new light that wasn't meant for me. The sound of the front door opening and her footsteps echoing through the hallway carried a weight I hadn't expected. My mom's face lit up instantly, her entire body language transforming as though she'd been waiting for this one moment to finally breathe again. She wrapped her arms around my sister with a warmth and urgency. At first, the exclusion was so subtle, I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. It began with conversations I wasn't invited into, tiny moments that seemed harmless on the surface. My mom and sister would sit together at the kitchen table, leaning in close, speaking in a tone that was soft and private. I would walk in to grab a glass of water, and their voices would drop even lower, the kind of hush that made me feel like an intruder. I told myself maybe they were talking about something sensitive, something they didn't want to share just yet. But when it kept happening, over and over, the message became harder to ignore. I didn't belong in those exchanges. The living room, once a space where I could sink into the couch and feel at ease, slowly transformed into their territory. They claimed the best spots, blankets wrapped around them as they shared stories and inside jokes, leaving me on the sidelines, an extra in a play I used to co-star in. It wasn't that they told me to leave, but the way they angled their bodies toward each other and away from me made it clear enough. I'd sit down, trying to join in, only to realize the rhythm of their conversation had no openings for me. It was like trying to jump onto a moving train, only to be shoved back by the wind. Even meals became different. My mom would ask my sister what she wanted to eat, tailoring dinner to her tastes, remembering details about her favorite foods as if they were sacred. I would chime in now and then, suggesting something or offering to help, but those moments would fall flat. My words skimmed across the surface, never sinking in, while every word from my sister seemed to land with weight and importance. I started to notice how my mom's eyes stayed locked on her, how the questions kept flowing toward her side of the table as though my presence was more of an afterthought than part of the family moment. Space in the house also began to feel off-limits. My sister spread her belongings everywhere. Her bags in the hallway, her clothes draped on the arm of the sofa, her makeup scattered across the bathroom counter. No one seemed to mind, least of all my mom, who insisted it was fine, that she needed the space. I tiptoed around those piles, careful not to disturb them, as though they were monuments of her importance. My own things suddenly felt out of place, like I was occupying borrowed territory. The nights were the hardest. I would hear their laughter drifting down the hallway, soft but consistent, long after I had gone to bed. My mom would sit in my sister's room for hours, talking to her, listening, offering reassurances in a voice I didn't recognize anymore. Sometimes I would press my pillow over my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound carried more than just noise. It carried a truth I didn't want to face. I wasn't part of those moments, and I never would be again. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself I was imagining the distance. But then there were moments that left no doubt, like when my mom told me to give them some space because they had important things to discuss, or when I walked into the kitchen one afternoon and they fell silent, exchanging a glance that said more than words could. My heart dropped, and I found myself retreating without even asking what they had been talking about. It was easier to remove myself than to risk the sting of knowing I wasn't welcome. Over time, I began to shrink inside my own home. I stopped lingering in the living room, stopped trying to join their conversations. I avoided dinners when I could, retreating to my room with excuses that I wasn't hungry or had things to do. My absence went unnoticed. Or maybe it was easier for them not to notice. Either way, it didn't seem to matter whether I was there or not. What struck me most was how quickly the shift became normal. The exclusion wasn't loud or cruel. It was quiet, polite even, but absolute. Every whispered conversation, every shared laugh, every choice that left me on the outside chipped away at me until I wasn't sure I had a place in that house anymore. The walls were the same, the furniture the same, but the home I had known had slipped out of reach, replaced by a version that no longer had room for me. It didn't take long before my mom stopped trying to hide her priorities. At first it was subtle, extra attention, small favors, little moments that showed she was focused almost entirely on my sister. But then it grew into something louder, clearer, undeniable. The way she spoke about my sister was always framed around need, as if her return home had been an emergency, a situation that required everyone else to step aside. I'd hear her saying things like, "She's been through so much. She just needs support right now," or "We have to give her space to heal." Each word was like a gentle reminder that my role was no longer as important as hers, that my presence wasn't the priority. Every conversation with my mom circled back to my sister. If I tried to talk about my day, about something that happened at work or in my life, she would listen halfway before pivoting to something about my sister. Her mood, her struggles, her needs. I could be pouring my heart out, trying to share something that mattered to me, and my mom would cut in with, "Oh, that reminds me, your sister said she couldn't sleep last night, or your sister's been feeling really anxious, maybe we shouldn't stress her." It was as though my words were background noise, something to fill the air until the subject could return to what really mattered. Chores around the house shifted too. Where my sister was excused, I was expected to pick up the slack. My mom would say, "She's too tired," or "She's going through a lot right now," and the unspoken ending was always, "So you should handle it." I'd find myself washing the dishes while they relaxed in the living room, or taking out the trash while my mom made tea for my sister. There was no fairness anymore, no sense of shared responsibility. Everything bent in her direction, and if I voiced frustration, it was immediately shut down. My mom would look at me sharply and say, "Can't you see she needs this? Why are you being selfish?" Those words cut deeper than she knew, because it wasn't selfishness driving me. It was the desperate need to feel like I still mattered. Even the way my mom spoke to me began to change. Her tone grew sharper, less patient, as if every question I asked or comment I made was an interruption. Meanwhile, her voice with my sister was tender, careful, almost worshipful. I started to feel like I was speaking a different language altogether, one that didn't earn the same level of respect. My mom's eyes followed my sister wherever she went, full of concern and attention, while mine barely caught her glance. There were moments when my mom's favoritism wasn't just implied but declared outright. Once, while making dinner, she said, "Your sister's been carrying such a heavy load, she deserves to be taken care of now. You don't understand because you've never had to go through what she has." The words stunned me. In one breath, she diminished everything I had gone through in my own life, everything I had carried without help, as though my struggles didn't count because they weren't visible enough or dramatic enough to earn her sympathy. It wasn't just prioritizing my sister, it was invalidating me entirely. I noticed how the house itself became a stage for this new dynamic. My sister's needs dictated everything. The temperature in the living room, the type of food cooked, the television shows chosen, even the volume of music or the time lights were turned off. If I objected, my mom would remind me that it's about keeping her comfortable. My preferences, my routines, my comfort didn't factor into the equation anymore. It was as though the house belonged to my sister now, and I was just borrowing space. The hardest part was the way my mom framed it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't act like she was making a choice between us. She acted like it was obvious, like any reasonable person would do the same. She spoke as if my sister's needs were more important by default, as if prioritizing her wasn't favoritism at all but duty. That framing left me feeling like I couldn't even argue back without looking cruel. If I said something, I was painted as the one lacking compassion, the one who didn't understand what family was about. The more my mom openly prioritized my sister, the smaller I felt in that house. It was like being erased in slow motion, bit by bit, while still being expected to carry the weight of responsibility without recognition. I was there, but I wasn't really seen. I was useful, but not cherished. I was family, but not the one who mattered. And though I told myself to be strong, to stay calm, each day of watching my mom pour all of herself into my sister, while leaving nothing for me, left me with the growing certainty that my place in her world had been reduced to something less than I had ever imagined. The tension in the house didn't explode all at once. It crept in slowly, like water seeping through the cracks of a wall, invisible at first until the damage could no longer be ignored. I could feel it in the silence between me and my mom, in the way her sighs seemed sharper whenever I spoke, and in the way my sister's presence seemed to grow larger, pushing me further into the margins. Every day, I found myself wondering how to fit into a home that no longer felt like mine. The very walls carried reminders that my place had shifted, and though no one said it outright, the message was written in the way my mom's gaze always drifted past me to focus on my sister. I tried to push those thoughts away, to convince myself that this was temporary, that once the novelty of my sister's return faded, things would find their balance again. But instead of easing, the imbalance became more pronounced. My mom's patience with me grew thinner, like she had no energy left for me after spending all of it on my sister. Small disagreements about chores, about space, about dinner, spiraled into tension that lingered long after the words had been spoken. It wasn't just about the issues themselves, it was about the undercurrent beneath them, the unspoken truth that I had become secondary. There were days when I would wake up early, hoping to find a quiet moment with my mom over breakfast, the way we used to. But when I came into the kitchen, she was already at the table with my sister, their heads bent together over coffee and whispered conversations. I'd sit down, trying to contribute, but the words would fall flat, like pebbles thrown into a well too deep to reach the bottom. They would smile politely at me, but the thread of connection between them didn't include me, and the harder I tried to tug at it, the more obvious it became that I wasn't part of that bond anymore. Evenings were worse. The house, once a place where I could unwind after a long day, became a stage where I was always aware of my own discomfort. My sister would stretch out on the couch, my mom bringing her snacks or blankets, fussing over her comfort while I sat in silence, pretending the knot in my chest didn't exist. If I tried to change the channel on the television or suggested something different for dinner, I was met with sharpness. Your sister likes this, or don't make things harder for her. Every time those words were spoken, it felt like a reminder that my wants, my needs, and even my presence were a disruption. I started spending more and more time in my room, retreating into that small space like it was the only corner left that belonged to me. But even there, I couldn't escape the weight of it. Laughter from the living room seeped under the door, or I'd hear footsteps outside as my mom checked in on my sister again and again. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself what I had done to deserve being sidelined like this. What mistake I had made that made me less worthy of care. The tension wasn't just external, it was internal, growing inside me with every moment I tried to swallow my feelings instead of speaking them aloud. And yet, when I did try to speak up, it never went well. I remember one evening when I told my mom I felt like I was being pushed aside, that I didn't know where I fit anymore. Her reaction was immediate, defensive. "This isn't about you," she snapped. "Your sister needs us right now. Why can't you understand that?" The words burned. It wasn't just that she dismissed my feelings, it was that she made me feel guilty for even having them. I walked away from that conversation feeling smaller than ever, like I had no right to claim my own hurt. The tension became a constant companion, a heaviness I carried through each day. Even simple moments, like walking into the room while they were laughing, made me feel like an outsider. The sound of their closeness, something that should have been comforting, pressed against me like a reminder of everything I no longer had. I wanted to believe that things would change, that my mom would notice the distance growing between us, but each day proved otherwise. My place in the house was becoming less about being a daughter and more about being someone who stayed out of the way. I found myself tiptoeing around my own home, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that existed between my mom and sister. It wasn't that I wanted to fight, I wanted the opposite. I wanted to feel like I belonged again, like I wasn't constantly on edge, bracing myself for the next reminder that I had been pushed aside. But no matter how much I tried to hold on, the tension only deepened, settling into the air like something permanent. And with every passing day, the struggle to find my place became harder, leaving me with the quiet, painful realization that maybe there was no place left for me at all. The breaking point came one evening when the air in the house felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. My sister was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red as though she had been crying earlier. My mom hovered over her, offering tea, stroking her hair, speaking to her in that soft tone that had become second nature. I walked into the room, trying to sit down quietly, but the moment I did, the atmosphere shifted. My mom looked at me, her expression tight, and I knew something was coming. She took a deep breath, her hand still resting on my sister's shoulder. And then the words fell. "I think it's best if you leave for a while. Your sister needs peace, and you being here is making things harder." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Leave? The word rattled around in my head like it didn't belong. This was my home too. I had grown up in these rooms, carved pieces of myself into every corner, carried responsibilities here that no one else had touched. But the way she said it, so calm and matter-of-fact, told me she had been thinking about it for a while. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decision. My sister stayed quiet, her head lowered, not meeting my eyes. That silence spoke louder than anything. If she had wanted me to stay, if she had cared about me being there, she would have said something. Instead, the silence confirmed what I had been feeling for weeks. I was no longer part of their equation. My presence was an inconvenience, something to be removed for her comfort. I tried to ask why, tried to argue my place, but every word I spoke was met with the same refrain: "She needs this right now." It was like a shield my mom used against me, deflecting everything I said. The frustration inside me bubbled up, not just because of the unfairness of it, but because of how quickly she dismissed my side. I wanted to shout, to remind her that I had needs too, that I had been pushed into the shadows for weeks, that I was her child as well. But the look on her face told me it wouldn't matter. Her mind was set, and in that moment, her loyalty belonged entirely to my sister. The night I packed my things, the house felt colder than it ever had before. I moved quietly through my room, folding clothes, stacking books, trying to keep my hands steady. Every item I placed into a bag felt like a piece of me being stripped away. My mom didn't come in to help, didn't offer comfort or even check on me. She stayed in the living room with my sister, their voices drifting down the hall in soft murmurs that only deepened the ache in my chest. It was as though I was already gone, erased before I had even walked out the door. Walking through the house with my bags in hand felt like moving through a place that had already decided I no longer belonged. The photos on the walls, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the scent of my mom's cooking that lingered in the air. All of it felt distant, like relics of a life I had been cut out of. My mom met me at the door, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes avoiding mine. She told me again that it was for the best, that my sister needed a calm environment. Her words were steady, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying something she didn't want me to see. I stepped out into the night, the door clicking shut behind me, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I had been pushed out of my own home, not because of something I had done wrong, but because my sister's comfort had been placed above my existence. The betrayal sat heavy in my chest, a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How easily I had been dismissed, how quickly my place in the family had been stripped away. In the quiet of that night, as I walked away carrying only what I could, the memory of my mom's words echoed in my head. She hadn't asked me. She had told me. She had chosen sides, and I wasn't the one she stood beside. That truth cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just about being told to leave. It was about realizing that the bond I thought was unbreakable could be severed so cleanly, so casually, in favor of someone else. The moment I stepped outside, I expected to feel only anger, but what came instead was a kind of hollow silence, a numbness that wrapped around me tighter than the night air. I walked down the street with my bags in hand, trying to convince myself I was strong enough to handle it, that leaving was simply another chapter I could get through. But as the distance grew between me and the house I had once called home, a wave of panic began to crawl up my chest. It wasn't just about where I would sleep that night or how I would manage the days ahead. It was the sudden realization that I had been untethered from the very thing I thought was unshakable: family. I tried to steady my breathing, but my thoughts spiraled faster with each step. What if leaving wasn't temporary? What if this was the new reality, and there would be no place for me in that house again? The certainty I once had, that no matter what, I belonged there, was gone, replaced with doubt that gnawed at me relentlessly. I had told myself for weeks that I could endure the exclusion, that things would balance out eventually, but now that I had been forced out, the truth hit me harder than I could have imagined. Maybe I wasn't meant to be part of their lives anymore. That night, as I settled into a friend's couch, the panic kept growing. Every sound in the unfamiliar apartment felt too loud, every shadow too sharp. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the scene at the door over and over again, my mom's face, her voice saying it's for the best, like it was a simple arrangement and not the unraveling of everything I had known. I thought of my room back home, the bed I had left neatly made, the book still on the shelf, the life that was continuing without me as if I had never really been there. The idea of being erased, of not being missed, tore at me until my chest felt heavy with dread. The panic wasn't only about being cast out, it was about being replaced. I imagined them sitting together, my mom fussing over my sister, maybe even laughing, relieved now that I was gone. The thought of them being lighter without me there was unbearable. I wanted to believe they would miss me, that my absence would echo through the house, but another part of me whispered that maybe they wouldn't. Maybe my mom had gotten exactly what she wanted. A home arranged perfectly around my sister, with no disruptions from me. That possibility kept me awake until dawn, my stomach twisting with fear. In the days that followed, the panic lingered in everything I did. At work, I couldn't focus. On the bus, I stared blankly out the window, wondering if my mom had even noticed the quietness of the house without me. I picked up my phone dozens of times, tempted to call her, to hear her voice and reassure myself that I still mattered. But every time I stopped, I was afraid of what she might say, afraid of the coldness I had already seen in her eyes. More than anything, I was afraid she wouldn't sound sorry, that she wouldn't sound like she wanted me back. Nights were the hardest. Lying in a borrowed bed, I kept picturing the house I had left behind. The way the kitchen smelled when dinner was on the stove, the sound of the old clock ticking in the hallway, the feel of my own blanket pulled up around me. Panic would hit hardest in those moments, the certainty that I no longer had a place to return to. Home wasn't supposed to be conditional. It wasn't supposed to vanish, and yet that was exactly what had happened. Even when I tried to distract myself, the thoughts came back in waves. What if this was the start of something permanent? What if my sister's presence had closed a door that would never open again for me? The more I thought about it, the more the panic grew, tightening its grip until I could hardly breathe. It wasn't just fear of being unwanted. It was fear of being forgotten. I imagined holidays without me, dinners without a place set at the table, birthdays passing by with only a text message, if that. The idea of becoming an outsider to my own family made my chest feel like it was caving in. I realized then that the pain of leaving wasn't only about the act itself. It was about what it revealed. My mom had chosen my sister, not just for a moment but perhaps for good. The panic came from knowing I couldn't force my way back into that space, no matter how much I longed for it. I couldn't compete with her need, couldn't demand a place when mine had already been surrendered so easily. And so, even surrounded by people in the outside world, I carried a loneliness that gnawed at me constantly. The panic was not just about where I was going next, but about the terrifying thought that I no longer had a home to go back to at all. In the end, what unfolded was not just a story of being asked to leave my home, but of realizing how fragile the idea of belonging can be when love is unevenly given. My sister's return became the turning point that revealed truths I had long tried to ignore. That my mom's care had limits, and that I was not always within those bounds. Being pushed out wasn't only about losing a place to stay, it was about losing the invisible assurance that family would always choose me too. The panic that followed came from more than the fear of the unknown. It came from the aching awareness that I had been replaced, that my presence could be sacrificed for someone else's comfort. And while I walked away with nothing but my bags, what weighed heaviest was the silence left behind, and the question of whether home would ever truly exist for me again.